Yeah, and I trust you're all okay, and that you're keeping safe, and that you're all happy and not majorly stressed by everything, all right? Because that's not good either, okay? Now we're going to be continuing on in our investigating of elasticity that we started the other day, and that is going to lead us quite nicely into the topic of market failure, which is quite a substantial topic to look at. You will notice as we go through elasticity, please keep in mind some of the other concepts that we've been discussing. Concepts like efficiency in the market and concepts like government intervention, because if you were to add in, so that synergistic link, if you were to add in the idea of elasticity into some of those other topics, you're going to see that there will be some changes possibly to what we'd originally thought. All right. Okay. So that being said, oh, there's now a raise hand button on my screen. That's pretty clever. All right, we're going to jump into the window. Excuse me. Now, what I've done is I have pushed the Nearpod link into the classroom. So it would be good if you could jump into that. It is GK3SQ. GK3SQ. So you can jump into the Nearpod, and it should pick us up where we left off. All right, so we should be all in here, hopefully. Wait for you all to sign in. There we go. Excellent. Right, so we had this idea of elasticity. We've got a couple of elasticities to actually talk about. But the key thing to think about with regards to elasticity is the idea of it being about responsiveness, right? How one variable, in this case quantity, how it responds when price has changed or another variable has changed. So it's the by how much, okay? Because we know, because of the law of demand and obviously the law of supply, that it will behave in this particular way, but we don't know the by how much idea. Now, we had our formula the other day for PED. It was the percentage change in quantity demanded, all divided by the percentage change in the price. And the rule of thumb that we said with regards to this was that the queen was always higher than the princess. So that is how we were to remember that Q was over P. Because it is very easy to get them around the wrong way, to get the P over the Q. Because you do, as we've said before, have to mind your P's and Q's. No. Okay.
I'm laughing, sir. Don't worry.
You are? Okay. I was trying to find my sound effects. No, they're not there. Where are they gone? An error occurred trying to open the page. Okay. All right. Now, we do need to also think about, again, it's that responsiveness with regards to demand. So we've got a couple of terminologies to think about. You've got the idea of something being inelastic, which means not as responsive, and something being elastic, which means more responsive, okay? And if you have a look at them, there they are. Something that is relatively inelastic, that's this one here, okay? So the quantity, on the quantity axis, it doesn't appear to change very much when the price changes. But if we have a look at this demand curve, we see that the quantity changes quite a bit with only a relatively small price change. So we can see that this one here, this demand curve here, is highly responsive or highly elastic. And this demand curve is relatively unresponsive or relatively inelastic. Okay, so that's what we're looking for. And so you can visually tell more or less whether it's going to be elastic or inelastic. Okay, you can have a little game going with your arm about what it should actually look like. Now I'm going to jump back to here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can open a Jamboard. Did I do this the other day? I don't remember if I did. Did I do a Jamboard with you the other day about?
You did once. But we didn't like join in. You were like showing something.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to do a Jamboard, and it will appear, the link to it should appear there in the chat function. So if you jump into the link, then it should appear on your screen. There it is. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of work here about PED. So here we go, PED. All right. I'm going to draw some axes here. One here. This one here. It's a little bit backward bending, that one, but that's okay. Now, for those of you who've seen this idea of elasticity before, this is not going to be particularly new, so I apologize about that. But for those of you who haven't seen elasticity before, whoa, this is going to blow your mind. All right, let's have a look. All right, so I'm going to draw two elasticity curves. All right, two demand curves. I'm going to attempt to draw them. All right, there's one. Here it comes. And I'm going to draw another one here. Oh. Okay, more or less. Right, there's my two demand curves. Now, the trick is going to be to figure out what's actually going on with those two curves. So we have a look at this one. So you got obviously price here, you got quantity here, price here, and quantity here. They are both demand curves, believe it or not, but they have very specific demand curves. So what we see here is we've got a demand curve where there's just no change in quantity. Look at that, none at all. So it doesn't matter what the price is, the quantity doesn't change. Now we're going to talk about why that is. We're going to talk about different types of goods and services perhaps that fit this particular model, right? But that's what we're thinking in this case here. Now there's a phrase that we're going to use, and the phrase is going to be perfectly inelastic. Okay? Because it's perfect. It is absolutely inelastic. It will not change regardless of the price. Then if we have a look at this demand curve, we see that this demand curve, the price doesn't even have to change really at all, and demand goes, whoa, lots of changes. Okay? So in this context, we talk about this demand curve being perfectly elastic. I'm going to give it a different color. There you go. Make them a bit bigger so you can see them. All right. So the demand curve on the left is perfectly inelastic. The demand curve on the right is perfectly elastic. Okay. Now, when you think about it, it makes absolute sense, because if you looked at your equation, okay, you had percentage change in quantity, percentage change in quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price. Now, if you were to do that calculation and work out what's called a coefficient, all right, and your coefficient for PED was equal to 0. Okay, which curve is going to have a coefficient of PED equal to 0? The one on the left or the one on the right?
The one on the right, I guess.
Oh, close.
It's the left, because if less than 1, it's inelastic. It's greater than 1, it's elastic. So here it's 0, so it's perfectly inelastic.
Absolutely. There is no change at all here. So it is going to be 0. There is 0 change, right? It doesn't change. So there is no response. So therefore, PED equals 0. Now, if we take the other option, I'm going to pick this color, and we do the calculation again. Oops, where's my calculator? Here you go. PED equals, now I don't know that I have the symbol. Oh, I'll just write it. Infinity and beyond. So therefore, which curve is going to have a PED equal to infinity?
Perfectly elastic curve.
Yeah, absolutely it will. Just like that. Now that's amazing. Again, blows your mind. But then you think about the maths of it. You've got percentage change, quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price. So therefore, the biggest number that could possibly be would be infinity. All right? Which means this changes infinitely. It infinitely responds whenever there's any even the remotely small chance of a change in price. It just goes kablam, kablam. Oops, sorry, moved it. All right, kablam, kablam. Okay. So therefore, what we've actually got here is a range, right? Because you've got a range in values from 0 to infinity and beyond. Infinity. Okay. But what if you get a PED that equals 1? Do I have a different color? Yeah. What's that going to be?
Unitary elastic?
Yes, it will. It'll be unitary elastic. It will be exactly proportional. So a 10% quantity change will be matched by a 10% price change, therefore equaling 1. Now, again, the mathematicians in the room have probably pretty quickly worked out what the demand curve is going to look like if it's exactly proportional, and we can talk about that. But what I'm trying to illustrate here is the range that you've got. You've got a range from 0 to infinity. That's the possible numbers that you could get. So the closer your responsiveness numbers, your coefficients get to 0, the more inelastic the numbers. The closer the numbers get to infinity, the more elastic the numbers. So the bigger the numbers, the more elastic. The smaller the numbers, the more inelastic. Okay. Now, here's where it's even easier in a way, graphically, those of you who are visually minded. Okay. If we have a look here, there is a particular letter of the alphabet that this one looks like. Do we know what it is? What letter of the alphabet does the perfectly inelastic demand curve look like?
I.
It looks like the letter I. Well done. Like a capital letter I. And, oh, hold on. What about this one? What letter of the alphabet does this one look like?
So we're not exactly sure to what you're pointing at.
Well, if you're in the Jamboard?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I can't see your cursor, but is it the E for elasticity? Like the.
What about now? Can you see it now?
You're not sharing the screen, so we can't see your cursor.
Yeah.
Right. Well, if I draw it then.
Or
How about now?
we're not looking at the right screen.
Does it
That
appear
works.
now?
Yeah, that works.
All right. So what letter of the alphabet is it?
An E.
An E. An E for elastic. So the closer it looks to the letter E, the more elastic it is. The closer it looks to the letter I, the more inelastic it is. And yes, that is a very New Zealand way of explaining it. Okay. For all of the New Zealand learners who are looking at this going, maths. Okay. All right. So let's jump out of the Jamboard now and go back to the Nearpod. There we are. So you can start to see it now. You can start to see the relatively inelastic curve looking more like the letter I and the relatively elastic curve looking more like the letter E. All right. And so in an exam, you can sit there and you can move your arm and go E, I, O. Oh, that's one sounds. But I guess you have to be an old MacDonald to be able to do that.
It's funny, sir. It's funny. I'm laughing in my head.
Okay, thank you. All right, explain the difference between an elastic demand curve and an inelastic demand curve. Did we do that the other day? You can do it now. You got 3 seconds. Go. Come on. There we go. Maybe we're having difficulty finding our keyboards. Oh no, here we go, we've got one. Oh, well done. Look at that. Fantastic. Yes, it's exactly what I want. Ooh, that's good too. Very good. Okay, Dane. Yes, good. Good. Right, now, those of you playing the game at home, it tries to look like the letter E. Okay. Yes. Well done. Yeah, I was wanting to know what the difference between the two was. All right. Very good. Very good. Okay. All right, we're on the right path. Remember, it's about responsiveness, about how it responds to a change in price. So the more elastic it is, the bigger the response. The more inelastic it is, the smaller the response. Now remember, it's a calculation, yeah? It's a formula. This one here, percentage change in quantity demanded to a percentage change in price. You're going to come out with a coefficient. And as we saw, the range is going to be from 0 to infinity. But you do have to be a bit careful with that when you really think about it, because how close are some of these coefficient numbers going to be? You know, I mean, 0.00000000001. You know, is that perfectly inelastic? Yeah. Or if a number is 0.999999999, for all intents and purposes, that's 1. That's unitary, but mathematically, it's not 1, or is it? Yeah. Or what about if it's 1.0000001? Is that more elastic or unitary? So there are some times when you can be critical about the theory, and you can look at what the coefficients are telling you, and you can talk about the strength, right? The strength of the relationship to see how elastic it actually is and what the numbers realistically tell you. So say, for example, you've got a coefficient of 2, right? And then you've got a coefficient of 1. Well, the coefficient of 2, in theory, is obviously elastic. But what about if you had a coefficient of 4? Well, that's double. So that's, yeah, much bigger, much more elastic, a much bigger response. All right. So, done that. Size of the relationship, strength of the relationship, terminology, good. Now, visually, check this out. If the coefficient is more elastic, i.e. greater than 1, okay, then what we're going to see here, if we have a look at the revenue able to be earned, right, so there's your demand curve. So if the price was here and then the new price was here, old price was here, new price is here. So we've decreased the price. We're going to see that was the original revenue. All right, revenue, the amount that they're earning from sales, so P times Q. This here is the new revenue they're able to earn, P2, Q2. So what we see is, it's going to be why this is so important for producers, because they're going to be able to work out what change is going to happen to their revenue, and therefore what pricing strategy would be the best one to take. So in this particular case, it's an elastic good. Say, think, I don't know, ice creams, for example. Then it would be better for them to offer a discount, a sale, a decrease in price for their ice creams, because by doing so, they're going to see a much more responsive increase in quantity demanded thereby increasing the revenue that they're able to earn. So if it's an elastic good, you should decrease the price as part of your pricing strategy. What about if it's an inelastic good? Well, an inelastic good is somewhat different because we saw that it was going to be less than responsive. So here, if we've got price 1 and quantity 2, sorry, price 1 here, all right? There is our revenue able to be earned. Okay, then if we increase here, that's the price going up. Yes, the quantity has decreased, but you've got a much bigger revenue by selling at that higher price. So if your product is an inelastic product, then woohoo, increase the price and you're going to increase your revenue. Now think of the implications for this. Yes, we talked about ice creams, right, as elastic goods. But think about some inelastic goods that there might be. Goods that people might be addicted to. Well, hey, you're going to be able to increase the price and people are just going to buy them. Yeah. What implications does that have for the government when they're putting sales taxes on? They're going to be able to get much more revenue from their sales tax as well. So this idea of elasticity is going to have a huge impact on pricing decisions made, okay, but also on the response, obviously, but on taxation decisions that the government might make. So say, for example, when we discuss cigarettes, okay, cigarettes are going to be considered to be a reputed necessity because people are addicted to them, a necessity by reputation. So therefore, they're going to have a more inelastic demand curve, which means even if the price goes up, whoop, there's going to be a relatively small decrease in quantity. So when the government starts putting taxes on cigarettes to decrease consumption, whoop, what's going to happen is that the government's going to earn a whole lot more revenue from it. And there's going to be very few people decreasing the quantity that they buy. Now, having worked in a supermarket for many years, okay, I know for a fact just how, well, in New Zealand, just how many people used to buy cigarettes. And I used to be baffled by this because the price every year, in fact, sometimes several times a year, there was one year the price of cigarettes went up by like 3 times in 1 year. Okay, and it was because the taxes, they would just put more taxes on and then more taxes on and then more taxes. And people were buying them. They weren't buying them in individual packets quite often. They were buying them in what's called a carton. Right, so that's not one packet, that's, I don't know, 10 packets, however many packets it was in a carton, I can't remember now. And so you'd multiply the individual cost by a whole carton cost. It was huge. It was the equivalent to an entire, and this is back then, this is a long time ago. It was the equivalent to an entire grocery bill that people were spending, but they were spending it just on cigarettes. Now in New Zealand, that is absolutely incredible to think about. But take this one then. Remember, we're talking about necessities as well. So those are things like your rice. Those are things like your bread, all of those sorts of things. They're going to have more inelastic demand curves. Yeah. So we start putting taxes on them. Oh, no. Yeah. Like goods and services tax or VAT, value added tax. Those are what are called consumption taxes. We start putting those taxes on. The government is going to earn a lot of revenue from them because people are going to buy the product regardless. Then you need to add in the extra economic theory of equity, the fairness side of this. Right? Consider who is buying the necessities. Consider who is buying the bread and the rice. Is it the incredibly wealthy people? Not typically. Right? It's the people who don't have a lot of income to start with. So what's going to end up happening is they're going to end up spending a greater proportion of their income on this particular product because of these taxes. So yes, then you've got that particular equity question coming in. How does these sorts of concepts impact with regards to taxation and revenue, sales, and on the actual ethics and equity issues with regards to who buys them and who doesn't? And there was a really interesting case study. It wasn't that long ago. It was at most a year, maybe 2 ago. and it was the inelastic demand for a particular product, and it was insulin in America. And one of the companies who are producing insulin decided that they were going to increase the price of it, like, whoosh, dramatically, because they worked out, oh, it's inelastic, we can just increase the price. And they did. They increased it by a huge amount. Okay, they ended up getting, the person who made the decision ended up getting arrested. The company got into a lot of trouble from the government for doing this. And a lot of people got really quite unwell because they were having to try and buy this product, and then they were not able to pay for food and all of these other sorts of things. It was like a 1,000% increase in price sort of idea. It was a dramatic change. And they made a huge amount of money from the sale of it. And again, you come back to the equity issues. You come back to the fairness aspect of that. All right, and remember we talked about our allocative efficiency ideas? Well, if your demand curve is sloped like this, okay, then your consumer surplus, your producer surplus, there's going to be some quite different implications for that. All right, now moving on. There it is. Again, the mathematicians were absolutely right. You've got a unitary elastic demand curve where PED, your coefficient, equals 1. Now, the shape of it, if you look at it, it is more like a curve, which is kind of nice because we call it a demand curve. So it's kind of nice that we see a curve that's actually looking like a curve. Now, again, the maths of this, you can play around a little bit with the maths of it. It is supposed to be exactly proportional, all right? So therefore, what's going to happen to the revenue that they're able to earn when they change the price?
The quantity demand will change proportionately with it.
Yes, it will. So therefore, your revenue is going to
Increase or decrease via the change, like
yeah. It's going to exactly match it. All right. So there won't be, your revenue change, right, is really not going to be a big dramatic change anywhere for it. Yeah. So because this is exactly proportional, there's P, there's Q. The best you're going to be able to do is just to keep going. Right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which direction you go. Right? You're just going to work out the equation based on P and Q. Now, unitary elastic was that one. We had the extremes, the inelastic. Done that. Yeah, no, we don't need to do that. All right. Now, what again? This is one of those things where we used to do like what are called live action kinesthetic games. And this one is a physical activity game, and some of you may actually remember this, particularly if you've done economics before. We used to do like a Simon Says activity. All right, and obviously doing this distance-wise, yeah, it's not really going to work this particular way, right? But we'd stand up and you'd have your arm ready, and we'd say inelastic and elastic, and you'd have to do it, and I'd gradually go faster and faster and unitary and all of that sort of idea, yeah. And then if you got it wrong, you'd sit down, and then it'd be the last person left standing. So that's the sort of thing we used to do. Obviously, distance-wise, that's quite tricky to pull off. I'm sure we could, if you turned all your cameras on, but then, yeah, no, I think we'll just move on from that. Right, inelastic demand, the percentage change in price will be proportionally greater than the percentage change in the quantity demanded for the good. So the coefficient will be less than 1, but greater than 0. Greater than or equal to 0. Right. Fill in the gaps. There you go. Good. Well done, rock stars with that. Wait for a couple more. Okay. Just wanted to check, because obviously I've got 2 joules, so I'm just wanting to check as to which joule I have today. I don't have both for some reason. I do have both. Only one is in the classroom, so it appears. All right. Percentage change in the price will be proportionally greater than the change in the quantity demanded for the good. So if it's inelastic, the PED will be less than 1, as 1 was exactly proportional, thereby unitary. The PED figure will be less than 1, the coefficient. It will be greater than 0. 0 was perfectly inelastic. Elastic demand, the value of PED was greater than 1, but less than infinity. So if the product had an elastic demand, then the change in price led to a greater than proportionate change in the quantity demanded. Away you go. Very quick. Fill in the gaps. Good work, Sharaf. Good work. All right. If the value of PED is greater than 1 and less than infinity, we say it is elastic demand, because the change in the price level will be greater than the proportional change. So leads to a greater than proportional change in the quantity demanded. Good. Now, what is it that we think the influences, the factors, the determinants are going to be with regards to whether the good, the service, is going to be considered to be elastic or inelastic? Well, we've kind of hinted at a lot of them already. All right, so the very first one is how different it is, how differentiated or unique the particular product is. All right, so something that has a one-off, right? You're the only person to get to see the Forbidden City. Yes, you'll pay the amount of money, okay? It's the World Cup final. It's the NBA Grand Final. It's the, yeah. It's a one-off event. You're prepared to pay potentially whatever the price. So it's a different or differentiated product. The time period involved, and we understand this, and we discussed this with your behavioral economics. The longer time you allow for people to make decisions, the more likely it is that they're going to be able to find an alternative. All right, so we saw all of the behavioral economics tools that encouraged people to make very quick, snap decisions. We also find the idea of loyalty, and these work a treat. The loyalty cards, all right, where you've got, you know, your Starbucks card. You know, oh, we'll go here because we've got the card for it. Okay, happens a lot. The breadth of your product category. Okay, how many types of petrol are there in your petrol station? How many different varieties of iPhone are there? Are they going to meet every single customer's needs? Yeah. Who is actually paying for it? And what we find is that products tend to be more inelastic if it's not you who's paying for it. Right? So therefore, if it's the business, the company, all right, they might be prepared to pay for you to go on the first class seats or the business class seats in the airline because, you know, it's a business cost. It's a write-off, as opposed to you who might be more elastic in that particular decision and maybe go for the economy or the premium economy most. So there are 5 determinants there: how differentiated the product is, the time period involved, how loyal the customers are, the breadth of the product category, and who is actually paying for the product. The next 3, these are ones, again, we see this all the time, the idea of how aware you are and how available substitutes are. We used to talk in New Zealand about the windscreen wipers in a car because they're quite unique and they're the only thing that does it, okay? There was a student who suggested he could tie his younger brother onto the roof of the car with a cloth, yeah, to keep the rain off. I don't know that that would be a particularly effective substitute, one would suggest. Right? How aware are you of the substitutes? Do you know? Can you go online and find, well, here's another shop that sells if this one doesn't? The percentage of your income that you're prepared to spend or that you are spending on that particular product. So the greater the percentage that you spend suggests you're more likely to be elastic in your decision. Right? You're going to shop around. You're not going to buy the first car you see. You're going to consider it. You're going to look at the safety ratings. You're going to go to several different shops. You're going to look them up online. And of course, the nature of the product itself. Is it habit forming? Is it addictive? Does it become a reputed necessity? And you do have to consider that, because these days, part of our behavioral economics tools is to make the product more habit forming or more addictive. The idea of gamification, those awarding you badges for playing the video games, that is really addictive for people. They've got to beat the next level, the little bar that goes across. Look, I'm almost there. I've just got to finish this next. Yeah. Determinants of PED, how inelastic or elastic it is. Now it's your turn to explain 2 determinants of PED. Go. All right, so just for the future, when we are distance learning in particular, One of the things that would be very helpful for me is, let's say Joel. If when you log in, if you can do like the Joel D or the Joel T, so I know who you are, right? That might be quite a useful thing to do, and maybe we could have the real Nick Fuentes. Okay, maybe we could have, I don't know, the real not black pilled. Okay, so that I'm actually able to determine who is there and who is participating and who isn't, right? Because it can become a bit of a problem because I can't actually physically see you, right? All right, let's see. Good. Well done, Ariane. Absolutely right. Very good. Very well explained. All right. The only thing I might add is maybe adding examples in there too. Yes. Good. There you go. Yeah. Okay. Good work, Fatima. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Okay, Winhow. Good. All right. Now, things like the idea, the consumption of petrol, okay? Because we consider petrol to be a more inelastic good, therefore, when the price of petrol increases, we assume that there will be a less than proportional response with regards to the quantity demanded. Okay? Now, you also need to understand that in a lot of countries, governments will put taxes on petrol. Right? It's considered a demerit good because of the impact on the environment. Okay, so in real life, even though it's a product that you don't necessarily think about, petrol you might consider to be more inelastic. Right, so we talked about those. Right now, something to figure out is this idea of when we talked about whether something is a necessity, and you need to understand that it's a range, yeah? That what's a necessity for one person isn't going to be a necessity necessarily for another person. So although, you know, some products are considered to be a necessity for me, you yourself might think, nah, yeah, nah, hey, right? And so it can be all sorts of things. And there's a range within that, okay? You think food would be a necessity, but if you go through the different types of food, right, maybe there are types of foods that are more elastic because they aren't perhaps as good a quality food, right? There are more substitutes when you get to that sort of level. All right. And the time period, as we said, So the key thing to note here is that PED is inelastic in the short term and becomes more elastic the longer the time period is that you have, which is what we were saying before. All right. So if you can reduce the time period, compress it as much as you can for the consumer to make their decision, then it's going to be more inelastic. Right? They're going to make the call. Now, here we go. Now, this is for our HL learners. Whoever you may be at this particular point in it, there isn't a confirmation yet that I have at any rate. All right. So we're going to think a little bit about what's called primary products. So we remember those all the way from the start of the course. So you've got primary, secondary, and tertiary related products. Your primary products are the natural resources. Your primary products are the ones that are more agricultural and horticultural based. Those products. What we're going to say is that their coefficients, their PED, tend to be low or tend to be quite inelastic, right? But for those particular products, and when you think about the types of products that we're talking about, those very agricultural-based products, they tend to be more necessities, right? They tend to be viewed by people as being quite essential for their life. Now, you might think that maybe bananas aren't particularly essential for people's lives, but again, the oil one and the coffee one you might consider to be essential for people's lives. In fact, the other year, there was a big coffee shortage. This is going back, I think, a decade, maybe a bit longer, and there was a worldwide coffee shortage, and it made international news, right? And it caused the price to go up quite considerably. Right, now, in any case, price is, for primary products, we tend to say that the coefficient for PED is fairly inelastic. Why? Because there's relatively few substitutes, and because for these types of goods, we tend to suggest that they are more of a necessity. Right? There will be some that are exceptions to the rule, like, say, the bananas, the fruits, etc. The horticulture industry, maybe. Now, it also means that those prices tend to be, the prices for the primary commodities tend to be quite volatile. They tend to move up and down quite a lot. And there are a couple of really good reasons why. The first one that we've just discussed is that they're actually quite inelastic. All right? They are considered to be necessities more often than not, and they have very few close substitutes. The other reason why is because of the idea of the supply. They're affected by the weather. They're affected by international situations like trading rules. They're affected by crises that occur. All of that. They're affected by war and earthquakes and all of that, right? And obviously the weather. And it becomes what's called a supply shock. So we have those on a semi-regular basis, okay? And as a result of that, the prices were up this time and down this time and up this time, and, you know, all right? Really good harvest this time, so price goes down. Big shortage this time, price goes up. Therefore, the PED for primary products tends to be more inelastic. But why then do we consider manufactured goods to be more elastic? All right. Well, they tend to be more elastic because, unlike the primary goods, we tend to say that they have many more substitutes. Even though they're perhaps a lot more complicated, there's a lot more technology, etc., involved in the production of them, we tend to say that, yeah, well, there's more substitutes for them. They're not quite as big and important a necessity as those primary-based products are. So, HL learners, explain the reason for the PED of primary products being relatively lower than that for manufactured products. There you go. All right, so that you all know, we had an email late last night from Miss Amanda that was going through some of the HL-SL splits, just clarifying a couple of key points. So I would expect to see, maybe even today, an actual full list of who is HL and who is SL, and hopefully it is a list that you all agree with as well. All right. If there are any problems with that, then yeah, you know the people that you need to talk to. It's the Mr. Kyles, Miss Amanda, and Miss Sarah's. All right. Those are the people that you need to be discussing the realities of the HL-SL split with. Okay. And obviously mum and dad. Good. Very good work, Joel. D or T. Oh, that's amazing, Fatima. Well done. Very good. Good work. Max. Good. Okay, now I've posted I think it escapes me. There will be a practice question coming to you very soon if it hasn't already. It's about, I think it's about either maximum minimum prices or PED, or it might be a combination of them both. I'm trying to remember now. And you've got a period of time to work on that one. There's another one that's due to come out next week. That's a slightly different format. That's an investigation that you can do. And yes, then there was an exemplar broken down with examiner feedback material, right, exam question, and it will look somewhat similar, right, to what you've been discussing already. Now, I put this slide in because sometimes I have math magicians in my class who say to me they don't like that particular formula, that there is an alternative formula that you can use. And, well, this is the one that they've come up with. All right, P divided by Q times change in Q over change in P. Now, a number of you have known me for a little while. Some of you haven't known me for that long at all. I am not a math magician, all right, at all, any way, shape, and form, all right? I don't understand this, okay? If you understand this and this works for you as a better equation for you to use, all right, particularly if you don't have the percentage changes, all right, then use that. All right. For me, I'm going to stick with the tried and true because that's what I know, percentage change. Yeah. All right. Just work it out. All right. But if this one is a better one for you to use, and okay, I don't want to limit you with what you can do. All right. But please don't use this if this is going to then confuse you. All right, because that won't be good. All right. There we go. Perfectly inelastic, perfectly elastic, unitary. All right, now I've also included in the slide some examples here. All right, so you've got the mini e-readers here, and then you've got the sales, the holiday, the tourism on this side here. right? Works out the percentage change in price, percentage change quantity demanded, and gives you a coefficient, and then it explains here what it is, right? So this is a formula that you can use, right? Ideally, you'd put the equation in, then you'd show your calculation, so show your working, then you'd say what the coefficient is, the answer, and then you'd explain what it means, all right? Over here, you could actually, because it then asks you to comment on the effect on revenue, all right? So you can do the same thing. You would put the equation in, then you would work out the percentages, do the actual calculation on the equation, find out the answer, the coefficient. You might want to then add in, is it elastic or inelastic? In this case, it's elastic. And then you'd talk about what would happen to total revenue. So you do need to make sure that you are carefully reading the questions as well. And here's another one. All right, this is a inelastic demand case study for what's called rare earth minerals, okay? And if you're not sure what they are, they're in pretty much everything that is technology based. And at last count, there was only basically 2 countries in the entire world that produced them, with China being one of them. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't know, I can't remember how old this slide is actually, that relatively recently, I believe China has attempted to buy up all of the supply from the other country, so that China are the 100% supplier of all of the rare earth metals that there are. Right, so they're used in pretty much everything, because everything's got magnets and batteries and displays, if it's technology based these days. All right, what about other types of goods? If we look at those, so these are food-based products here, well, not all of them. Obviously, you've got CDs or DVDs, which one these are. All right, so goods that tend to be more elastic. All right, they are goods that are food, but, well, not all of them, but they're not necessarily inelastic, okay? These ones you might suggest are more inelastic because there's fewer substitutes to them. I mean, you've got salt and pepper, you know, the seasoning, light bulbs, okay? And of course your medicines that are potentially quite vital. Right, that's what we'd do in class. Right, so here we go. So this is again a breakdown just to show you how you write these sorts of things out. So you've got a price that's been reduced by 10%, the quantity demanded has risen by 20%, so you have to do the calculation to work out what the PED is. You calculate the PED, in this case it's -2. What does that mean? It means that the quantity demanded has changed at twice the rate that the price has changed. In other words, a 1% fall in the price has led to a 2% increase in the quantity demanded. Therefore, demand will be classified as elastic, or PED for this particular product classified as elastic. Here's another example. The original price was $5 and the original demand is 100 units. The price has increased by 1, the demand has decreased by 10. So if you have a look there, they haven't given you the percentages, you have to work them out. All right, so price has increased by 20%. Okay, we can see that. All right, $1 from 5. And quantity demanded has decreased by 10%, 10 from 100. So therefore you've got 10% over 20% is half, which is 0.5. What does that mean? Well, it means that it is inelastic. It is an inelastic or a less than proportional response. All right. All right. The rules. If the demand for a product was elastic, more responsive, then the firm should decrease their prices in order to see an increase in total revenue. If the demand for a product was more inelastic, demand was not very responsive to a change in price, then a firm should increase its price in order to increase its total revenue. Those are the rules that we apply. So when you're asked about who cares, when you're asked about what the significance of an understanding of PED is to a business, the stakeholder, this is the sort of thing that you are then explaining. All right. So PED helps you to work out your price strategy, as said. PED helps you figure out what the impact is on your revenue, as said. It also helps you to engage in price discrimination. Now, this isn't a bad thing. We're not talking about, oh, we're not going to sell you this product because we don't like the look of you. No, it's not that. In this case, it's like we've seen in the airplane, where you've got the economy class, and then the premium, and then the business class, and then the first class. It's different prices based on different PEDs. Right? So if it's more inelastic for Joel as opposed to Max, then you might be able to charge them different prices for the same essential product. Right? It enables businesses to work out how much of their taxes that they get charged they're going to be able to pass on to consumers. And we had a wee conversation about that with the inelastic product, right? The inelastic demand, perhaps on cigarettes, where we, an increase in tax increased the price, but meant that they could pass a lot more of that onto the consumers because, very little change, very little responsive change in quantity demanded occurred. It also helps the government figure out what's going to happen to their tax revenue. Right? It gives you an idea about whether the government is putting taxes in place in order to gain revenue, or whether they're putting taxes in place in order to fix social problems. You might wonder about that too. What we're going to discover a little bit later in the course is that those indirect taxes, the GSTs, the VATs, the demerit goods taxes, the customs duties, those types of taxes, right, they're actually more efficient, more effective as a tax than income tax, because people, as you've possibly discovered, right, like people who shall remain nameless, who hopefully won't be present for much longer, are actually able to avoid paying income tax. Right? So therefore, we're able to charge them for the goods and services that they buy, and that enables the government to earn more revenues. Right? Revenue. Okay. That's a little bit later. No, moving on. Okay. Here's about movie tickets. Calculate and explain. Where you go. All right, so you're going to do the calculation. Remember, that's your quantity there, so it needs to be the percentage change in the quantity demanded divided by the percentage change in the price. Have a go. Andrew first out the gate. Good man. What's the PED? Yeah, you might have got the calculation wrong there, Joel. Maybe have another crack at it. See if you can have another look at it. Good work, Ian. All right, so you've got the calculation shown, worked out the coefficient, and said the implication of it. Very good. Yeah, you might have got the calculation wrong, Kendrick. Good work, Wenhao. You haven't actually given any details here about what's happening, what the coefficient is, and what that means. You also got a negative number for the PED coefficient, which you can't have for PED. Good, Ariane. Okay, you haven't shown the calculation, Sharaf. That would be a good thing to do. Very good. Yep, ooh, we've got the calculation incorrect here. If we could have another go at that, that would be good. All right, in fact, we will. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to have a go at, where'd it go? Oh, it's supposed to be there. It's not there. Okay. All right. Okay, so yes, it was indeed a 10% change in price. Okay, and it was a, what did we have? 5% change in quantity demanded. Right, so Q is always higher than the princess. So you're going to have a 5% change in, where did we see one that had it? Here we go. 5% over 10% is 0.5. Andrew, good. Maybe say that it's inelastic at that point. So we do have to remember that, yeah, it's 5% over 10%. Okay. Do be careful with your calculations. Make sure you get them right. I haven't finished that one. Double check. Because I'm not a strong mathematician, I always have to double check my calculations, which is another reason to be sometimes concerned about time management, right? Because you're going to need to go back and double check. Yes, that's fine. You need to go back and double check that you got it right. And the rule of thumb, usually for me at any rate, was if I do the same equation twice and I get a separate answer, a different answer, the second time, I must have done something wrong somewhere. And I'd have to go back a third time and go through it line by line. All right, okay. Now there is another practice there that you can do. All right, now I did think I had this set up as a question for you to do again, but that's okay. All right, you can do this one yourselves at home. All right, it's a football club. All right, they have raised the price of tickets from $50 to $60. Then the quantity demanded has decreased from 50,000 tickets to 45,000 tickets. What is the PED? What does that tell you about the PED for football tickets? It's just, again, it's that repetitiveness, perhaps, but it's a different case study, repetitive practice, just so that you get used to following that format. What is the formula? Do the calculation. What is the PED? What does that tell you? All right, if you have any struggle with that, please do let me know and we can send you more work on that. All right, calculation of PED generally has two possible outcomes. You generally say it's either going to be elastic or it's going to be inelastic. Remember to ignore the minus sign. There will be some special cases where it is perfectly inelastic, perfectly elastic, or when it is unitary. And we need to know when that happens. All right, so perfectly inelastic, when PED is 0, perfectly elastic, where PED equals infinity, and unitary elastic, where PED equals 1. So those will be the special cases. Yes. All right, there's another example here, case study. This one's about Uber, which is a version of Grab. I don't know if you have Uber here or not, but they're talking about how you're using the idea of elasticity with regards to peak time. So people are, because they're more inelastic during peak times, you know, it's raining, and right, so they're going to change their pricing based on the elasticity at the time. And then you've got to ask yourself the equity question, how fair that is, potentially as well. Now, in the slides, there are several different videos here, also on the site, that you can look at, that are all, these are good ones. I know there are a whole range of others online that you can find, right? But Mr. ACDC Leadership, the Marginal Revolution University, Tutor to You, and obviously Econ plus DAO, they are tried and tested. Yes, there are others available as well. Now, I tend to, again in class, I tend to make the learners do like a summary box, okay, with regards to the impact on revenue. Feel free, take a screenshot, chuck it in your notes so you can annotate around it, okay? So you've got an absolute value, there's your coefficient, okay? So if it's greater than 1, elastic, all right? Equal to 1, unitary, less than 1, inelastic. Then what happens if price increases to revenue? What happens if price decreases to revenue? And what we said with regards to this for revenue for unitary elastic, you remember from the curve, right? The unitary curve is that your revenue doesn't change. Right? It doesn't matter where you go, it won't change. Right? So that's got some pretty significant implications as well. All right? So please take a screenshot of that, chuck it into your notes so that you're able to refer to that as well. As said, in class, we would normally do that as a table. Again, similarly, I used to get learners to draw these out and then write underneath them, this one's perfectly, there's the coefficient, this one's relatively, there's a, you know, so that they had that understanding of the range. If you need that in your notes to help you, please, again, take a screenshot, put it into your notes. Or you can just clip it from the slide, copy it and paste it. All right. It is possible also to work out PED just from a diagram alone. All right, so if the diagram has the actual numbers on them, then you could actually potentially work out the percentage change in quantity and the percentage change in the price and work out the PED. Now you'll have a visual clue from the diagram. It's relatively inelastic, right? So that will give you some idea and some understanding. Now I don't know that that we used to do that quite a lot because the skill set was to be able to work out PED from a diagram and from a written formula as well. These days, not as much, but you never know. Okay. There's another one, all right, more elastic, again, working it out from the diagram. Now, HL learners again, all right, an additional wrinkle to add into your already complex things that are rushing at you very, very quickly. The demand curve, all right, if you look at it, what we say is that elasticity varies or changes depending on where you are on the demand curve. Ooh, spooky. All right, SL learners, you can close your ears. All right, the closer you get to the top of the demand curve, so closer you get to 0, the more elastic the demand curve is. All right, the demand curve is going to be unitary elastic right in the middle. And then it is going to be more inelastic near what's called the bottom or near the quantity axis. And it will be perfectly inelastic exactly at the point where it intersects with the quantity axis. So a big separate bullet point within the syllabus, specifically this year, because it's a change from last year, this year specifically targeting HL learners only, is that your elasticity varies along your demand curve. So depending where you are, so if the supply curve was up here, then that's more an elastic response. If the supply curve is down here, that's more an inelastic response. If the supply curve cuts exactly through the middle at 45, then that will be very much a unitary response. All right, so the elasticity will vary along the length of the demand curve. All right, there it is. And this is a numerical illustration of that. So it depends where you take the calculations from. All right, and that will give you different responses. Scary. So it's a bit of a note to not use the slope of the curve to determine elasticity. You've actually got to do the equations. The slope can give you an indicator of overall elasticity, but it can't actually give you the point values for elasticity. Why it is because the gradient is going to be constant along a curve. The slope is constant. And again, the mathematicians amongst you will know this. Right? The slope is constant along a linear demand curve. However, the rate of change of price and quantity aren't constant. So as the price increases, the percentage change in the price diminishes while the percentage change in the quantity increases. Therefore, the slope can't be the same as elasticity. Now that understanding, if you get that, right, as an HL learner, again, even though it's HL, you're going to put yourself up there amongst the top 5% of all of the HL learners in the world, because that is quite mathematical, and it is an additional understanding that they're not all going to get. Okay, it is a separate bullet point, so you can expect that there are versions of the papers that are going to either include a specific question on this, or that are going to expect you to synergistically include this information when you are talking about demand curves. All right, I'm going to stop sharing just right about now. Jump back to the meet, which is here. Push this button, which is very helpful, a very helpful button. All right. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as said, things that are going to be happening. There's a practice question that's going to be appearing in the classroom. It's either there now or it's coming, right? There was a exemplar question that I pushed through to you, which was suggested solutions, examiner comments, and I think I put some student written answers in there too. I've got more of those sorts of things, but not specific to the topics we're currently doing. But I can find, similar ones from past papers and the like, right, that I'll be able to break down and send to you in the future. Now, excuse me, there is a chance that we will, according to the powers that be, that we will be back at school, all right, this term, all right, because the CMCO officially finishes on the 9th, 6th, 9th, something along those lines, and our term runs until about the 17th. So there is a chance that we actually might be back at school for that week, okay? We don't know. I mean, obviously numbers are still going up and down a bit. They were a little bit lower the other day. They've gone a little bit higher again. So, but then they're closing some of those areas that had big clusters. They're closing some of those down, which is good. All right. So it's up in the air still. All right. So, but keep that in mind. All right. Obviously, those of you who are distance learning, in any case, it won't make a huge, big shift for you, other than the fact that, the setting will be slightly different. You won't be staring at my curtains for the whole time, all right? Now, ladies and gentlemen, please do review the material, work your way through that practice question. You've got time to do that, so I know you've got everything else happening at the same time, but review. There's work that's also being pushed to you through the In Thinking IB site. Please work your way through that. If you haven't accessed the In Thinking IB site yet, and I think there's at least 2 who haven't, please do register with it. I sent you a link to it. You need to log into it in order to get access to all of that work. All right? Otherwise, you're just going to miss that entire thing. All right? It is a very good site. There is a lot of very useful things in there, and hopefully we'll be able to keep the subscription going all the way through to your year 13 year, and it will be intensely valuable, okay, to use it regularly. So there's that. There's the practice question coming. There was the review one that I sent to you, the exemplar. Yes, I think that's about us for the time being. We are going to be moving into market failure very soon. I'm anticipating starting that hopefully next week. All right, we've got a little bit more elasticity work to cover, and then we should be able to touch on market failure maybe by Friday. Maybe by Friday. We'll see how we're progressing as we go through elasticity, and there might be questions, etc., that come from that. All right, it is a big topic. Please do make sure you're regularly reviewing and asking any and all questions that you need. Otherwise, as we say in the land of my birth, he kōrē rā, which means goodbye for now.
Thank you, sir. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, you too.
Bye.
Bye, bye, bye. You all right, Dawan? You still here? I'm going to have to remove you from the meeting, Darwin.